Marcus Bennett stood before the mirror in his small apartment, adjusting his graduation gown one last time. His dark fingers smoothed down the wrinkles as he took a deep breath, studying his reflection. Today marked the end of his 3-year journey at Chicago Law School, and he was graduating at the top of his class. The morning sun streamed through his window, highlighting the dozens of law books scattered across his desk. Each one represented countless nights of studying, approving himself again and again in a system that seemed determined to hold him back. But Marcus had never been one to give up easily. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, Marcus had witnessed firsthand how the justice system treated people who looked like him. His father, a hard-working mechanic, had always told him, "Son, if you want to change the game, you've got to learn the rules first." Those words had stuck with him, becoming his guiding light through the challenging years of law school. As he walked through the halls of the law school for the last time as a student, Marcus couldn't help but remember his first day. The sideways glances, the whispered comments, and the professor who had asked him if he was in the right classroom. Out of the 200 students in his year, he was one of only 5 black students. 3 years later, he was delivering the graduation speech. "Hey, Bennett," called out Professor Williams, an elderly white man who had become his mentor. "Ready for your big moment?" Marcus smiled, remembering how the same professor had challenged him more than any other student in his first year. It wasn't until later that he understood why. Professor Williams had seen his potential and refused to let him give anything less than his best. "As ready as I'll ever be, sir," Marcus replied, straightening his shoulders. The graduation ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of the law school, where hundreds of proud families gathered to watch their children receive their degrees. Marcus's mother sat in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, tears already forming in her eyes. Next to her was an empty seat, his father's seat. He had passed away during Marcus's 2nd year of law school, but Marcus knew he was watching from somewhere above. When it was time for his speech, Marcus approached the podium with steady steps. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. Looking out at the sea of faces, he began to speak. "When I was 10 years old, I watched my uncle get arrested for a crime he didn't commit." His voice rang clear through the hall. "I didn't understand then why the color of his skin made him guilty before he ever stepped foot in a courtroom. But I understood enough to know that something was wrong with our system." As he continued his speech, Marcus shared his vision of a justice system that truly served everyone equally. He spoke about the responsibility they all carried as new lawyers to ensure fair treatment for all citizens, regardless of their race, background, or economic status. "The law should be a shield for the innocent and a sword against injustice," he declared, his words drawing nods from his fellow graduates. "Today, we're not just receiving degrees. We're accepting the duty to make that ideal a reality." After the ceremony, as families celebrated and photos were taken, Professor Williams pulled Marcus aside. "Bennett, I got some news," he said, his face serious. "Remember that clerkship position we discussed, with Judge Harrison?" Marcus nodded, his heart beating faster. Judge Harrison was known for being one of the most respected judges in Chicago, and a clerkship with him could open countless doors. "It's yours if you want it," Professor Williams said, breaking into a smile. "He was impressed by your application and your academic record. This could be the start of something big, son." Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. All those nights studying until dawn, all the times he'd had to prove himself worthy in spaces where others were automatically accepted, it was all paying off. He thought about his father's words again about learning the rules to change the game. As he drove home that evening, his graduation gown carefully hung in the back seat along with his diploma, Marcus felt a mix of pride and determination. He had made it through law school, but this was just the beginning. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. Ready to learn, ready to work, and ready to make the changes he dreamed about since he was that confused 10-year-old watching his uncle being wrongfully arrested. Little did Marcus know that his own encounter with injustice was waiting just a few years down the road. An encounter that would test everything he believed in and ultimately lead him to a position where he could truly make a difference. 5 years after his graduation, Marcus Bennett had built a solid reputation as one of Chicago's most promising defense attorneys. On this particular evening, he was driving home from his law office after winning another important case. His dark blue suit was slightly wrinkled after the long day in court, but his spirit was high. The city streets were quiet, with only a few cars passing by in the cool autumn evening. Marcus had just finished a phone call with his mother, telling her about his victory in court. She had been especially proud when he mentioned how he'd helped a low-income family keep their home from unfair foreclosure. As he stopped at a red light, Marcus noticed a police cruiser pull up behind him. He didn't think much of it at first, keeping his eyes on the road as he made his turn onto Oak Street. However, the cruiser's lights suddenly flashed to life, its siren giving a short whoop to signal him to pull over. Marcus knew the drill. As a black man driving in Chicago, he'd been through this before. He carefully pulled his car to the curb, positioning it perfectly. His hands moved to the steering wheel, gripping it at the standard 10 and 2 position. The dome light was already on, and his license and registration were ready to be handed over. Two officers approached his car. Officer Thompson, a tall white man with a crew cut, took the driver's side while Officer Rivera, a shorter Hispanic officer, stood at the passenger window. Their flashlights beam cut through the darkness, scanning the car's interior. License and registration, Officer Thompson demanded, not bothering with any greeting. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied calmly, slowly reaching for his documents. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "You ran that stop sign back there," Thompson said sharply, though Marcus knew for certain there hadn't been any stop sign on his route. "Officer, I respect your position, but I have to disagree. There wasn't a stop sign on my route, and I've been driving carefully," Marcus stated professionally, handing over his documents. Officer Thompson's face hardened at the challenge. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand moving to rest on his weapon. Marcus knew his rights as both a citizen and an attorney, but he also knew the reality of his situation. "Officer, I don't believe that's necessary. I'm an attorney with Wilson and Brooks Law Firm and I." "Oh, you're an attorney." Thompson cut him off with a mocking laugh. "Rivera, we've got ourselves a lawyer here." Officer Rivera joined in the laughter, his flashlight beam still trained on Marcus's face. "They'd all become lawyers when we pull them over, don't they?" Marcus remained calm, though his heart was racing. He reached slowly for his business card holder. "I can provide you with my bar association card and—" "I said get out of the car." Thompson's voice rose sharply, and he yanked open the car door. Marcus carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm complying, officer, but I want to state for the record that I'm protesting this treatment." As soon as Marcus stepped out, Thompson grabbed his arm roughly, spinning him around to face the car. "Spread your legs, hands on the hood." "This is unnecessary force, Officer Thompson," Marcus said clearly, making sure to use the officer's name that he'd read on the badge. "I've been cooperative, and you have no probable cause for." Before he could finish, Marcus felt himself being shoved hard against his car. His expensive suit scraped against the hood as Thompson twisted his arm behind his back. Resisting arrest, Thompson announced loudly, as Rivera moved in to help restrain Marcus. "I'm not resisting," Marcus stated firmly but calmly, even as the handcuffs bit into his wrists. "Everything you're doing is being recorded by my car's dashboard camera, and I will be filing a formal complaint." This only seemed to anger the officers more. They'd roughly pulled him away from his car, ignoring his professional demeanor and rational protests. Marcus could see neighbors peeking out their windows at the commotion, and he made sure to speak loudly enough for anyone watching to hear. "I am complying fully while reserving my right to protest this unlawful detention," he announced clearly. "I am an attorney, and you are violating my civil rights." "Save it for the judge," Officer Thompson sneered, shoving Marcus into the back of the police cruiser. As they drove away, leaving his car parked on the street, Marcus began mentally documenting every detail of the encounter. His body was sore from the rough handling, but his mind remained sharp. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever faced similar treatment but lacked the resources to fight back. Little did Officers Thompson and Rivera know, their actions that night would come back to haunt them in ways they never could have imagined. The ride to the police station felt longer than it actually was. Marcus sat silently in the back of the patrol car, his wrists aching from the overly tight handcuffs. He watched through the mesh barrier as Officers Thompson and Rivera talked and laughed in the front seats, occasionally glancing back at him with smirks on their faces. Marcus maintained his silence, remembering everything he ever told his own clients about police encounters. Every word he spoke now could be twisted and used against him. Instead, he focused on memorizing details: the time, the patrol car number, the street names they passed. At the police station, the officers roughly pulled him from the car. The cool night air hit his face as they marched him up the stairs. Several other officers watched as he was brought in, but none seemed surprised or concerned by the sight of a well-dressed black man in handcuffs. "Got ourselves a smart one here," Officer Rivera announced to the booking sergeant. "Says he's some kind of lawyer." The booking sergeant, an older white man with graying hair, barely looked up from his computer. "Charges? Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and running a stop sign," Thompson replied, tightening his grip on Marcus's arm unnecessarily. "I need to make my phone call," Marcus stated calmly, speaking for the first time since entering the station, "and I want to file a formal complaint about excessive force." This got the sergeant's attention. He finally looked up, studying Marcus more carefully. The expensive suit, despite being wrinkled and scuffed now, and Marcus's professional demeanor seemed to give him pause. "Which firm did you say you're with?" the sergeant asked, his tone slightly less dismissive. "Wilson and Brooks," Marcus replied. "And my colleagues will be very interested in how a routine traffic stop escalated to this point." Officer Thompson stepped forward aggressively. "He's been combative and uncooperative from the start, Sarge. Tried to pull the lawyer card to get out of a ticket." Just then, the station door opened, and a familiar face walked in, Maria Rodriguez, one of Marcus's fellow attorneys from Wilson and Brooks. She'd been working late at the office when Marcus's earlier call to his emergency contact had come through. "I'm here representing Marcus Bennett," she announced firmly, her heels clicking on the floor as she approached the desk. "I want all charges dropped immediately, and we'll be filing a civil rights violation lawsuit first thing in the morning." The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. The booking sergeant looked uncertainly between Maria and the two officers, who were now standing straighter, their earlier smugness replaced by concern. "These officers had no probable cause for the stop," Maria continued, pulling out her phone to take photos of Marcus's condition. "They used excessive force on a compliant citizen, and we have dashboard camera footage to prove it." Officer Thompson stepped forward. "Now wait a minute." "No, you wait," Maria cut him off sharply. "Every minute you continue to detain my colleague illegally adds to the damages we'll be seeking. Would you like me to call Judge Peterson right now? He's waiting to hear from me." The mention of the judge's name worked like magic. Within minutes, the handcuffs were removed, and the booking sergeant was apologizing for the misunderstanding. Marcus rubbed his wrists, noting the red marks left by the too tight cuffs, as Maria documented everything with her phone camera. Officers Thompson and Rivera stood to the side, their earlier bravado completely gone. They whispered urgently to each other, occasionally throwing worried glances at Marcus and Maria. "We'll need copies of all reports filed tonight," Maria informed the sergeant, "and the badge numbers of both officers involved." As they walked out of the station 30 minutes later, Marcus finally let out a long breath. The night air felt different now, heavy with the weight of what had just happened, but also with the determination of what needed to be done next. "You okay?" Maria asked quietly as they walked to her car. Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. "I am, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." "We'll file first thing in the morning," Maria agreed. "Make them answer for this." As they drove back to retrieve Marcus's car, he thought about all the other people who'd faced similar treatment but didn't have a law firm backing them up. People who didn't have colleagues who could rush to their rescue with threats of lawsuits and judges' names. That night had changed something in Marcus. He'd always fought for justice from within the system, but now he'd experienced firsthand the very injustice he'd been fighting against. As he finally headed home in his own car, he made a silent promise to himself and to everyone who'd ever been in his position. This incident would become a catalyst for real change. The next morning, the law offices of Wilson and Brooks buzzed with unusual energy. Marcus sat in the conference room, his laptop open in front of him as he carefully typed out his official statement. Despite the previous night's ordeal, he looked impeccable in a fresh charcoal gray suit, refusing to let the incident affect his professional appearance. Senior partner David Wilson paced the room, his face red with anger as he read through the preliminary police report. "This is completely fabricated," he muttered, tossing the papers onto the table. "They claim you were aggressive. You're one of the most level-headed attorneys I've ever met. Maria Rodriguez sat across from Marcus, organizing the photos she'd taken the previous night. The bruises on Marcus's wrists had darkened, providing clear evidence of the excessive force used during his arrest. The dashboard camera footage from my car should have captured everything, Marcus said, pausing his typing. We need to request it immediately before it mysteriously disappears. Just then, Sarah Chen, the firm's civil rights specialist, rushed into the conference room. You're not going to believe this, she announced, waving her phone. The incident is already on social media. One of the neighbors recorded everything on their phone. The room fell silent as Sarah played the video. The shaky footage clearly showed Marcus being cooperative while the officers manhandled him. His calm, professional voice could be heard stating his rights, followed by the officers' aggressive responses. This changes everything, David said, a small smile forming on his face. The department can't sweep this under the rug now. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained serious. It's not just about me, he said quietly. How many others have gone through this without video evidence? Without a law degree? Without a powerful firm behind them? The door opened again and Jessica Barnes, the firm's PR specialist, entered with a stack of messages. The media's caught wind of the story. We got requests for interviews from every major network in Chicago. Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. He knew how he handled this would affect not just his case, but potentially many others. We need to be strategic about this, he said finally. This isn't about revenge or public shaming. It's about systemic change. Over the next few hours, the team worked tirelessly to build their case. The conference room walls slowly filled with documentation. The illegal stop, the excessive force, the false arrest, the civil rights violations. Each piece of evidence was carefully cataloged and cross-referenced. By afternoon, Marcus's mother arrived at the office, her face etched with worry. When she saw her son, she rushed to hug him, tears in her eyes. "Baby, are you okay? When I got your message this morning." "I'm fine, Mom," Marcus assured her, returning her hug. "And we're going to make sure something good comes from this." As his mother sat with him, Marcus received a surprising call. Judge Peterson, a respected federal judge he'd appeared before several times, was on the line. "Bennett." The judge's deep voice came through the speaker. "I've heard what happened. This kind of behavior from law enforcement cannot stand. You have my full support in pursuing this matter." The support from Judge Peterson added another layer of strength to their case. By evening, the team had drafted a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit against the police department, Officers Thompson and Rivera, and the city of Chicago. "We're not just asking for damages," Marcus explained to his colleagues as they reviewed the final draft. "We're demanding mandatory reform in police training, independent oversight, and a complete overhaul of their stop and search procedures." As the day went down, Marcus stood at the office window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. The city he loved, the city he'd grown up in, still had so far to go. But maybe, just maybe, his experience would help push it in the right direction. "Ready to head home?" Maria asked, appearing beside him with his coat. Marcus turned to her with a determined smile. "Almost. Just need to make one more call to our contact at the Civil Rights Division. This case isn't just about last night anymore. It's about making sure there isn't a next time." As he gathered his things to leave, Marcus caught his reflection in the window. He saw more than just a lawyer now. He saw someone who had experienced firsthand the injustice he'd spent his career fighting against. And somehow, that made him even more determined to create change from within the system. Little did he know, this incident would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just his career, but the entire Chicago legal system. The media storm hit Chicago like a whirlwind. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus's case had become the talk of the city. Local news stations played the neighbor's video footage on repeat, showing the well-respected attorney being roughly handled by Officers Thompson and Rivera. In the bustling newsroom of the Chicago Tribune, veteran reporter Michael Chen sat across from Marcus, recording their interview. "Mr. Bennett, you could settle this quietly," Chen noted, tapping his pen against his notepad. "The department has already offered a substantial settlement. Why continue pushing?" Marcus straightened in his chair, his expression resolute. "Because this isn't about money. It's about changing a system that allows these incidents to happen repeatedly. How many others have faced similar treatment but lacked the resources to fight back? The police department's internal affairs division had launched an investigation, but early signs weren't promising. Captain Roberts, the head of internal affairs, seemed more interested in damage control than actual reform. Our preliminary investigation shows no evidence of wrongdoing, Captain Roberts had announced at a press conference the previous day. The statement had caused an uproar, especially given the clear video evidence showing otherwise. Marcus's law firm had transformed into a command center for civil rights reform. Letters of support poured in from other victims of police misconduct, each sharing similar stories of profiling and excessive force. Maria Rodriguez worked tirelessly, organizing these testimonies into a pattern of systematic discrimination. One morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his office. James Turner, a retired black police officer, had come forward with inside information. "I served with Thompson and Rivera," Turner explained, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "This isn't their first incident. They've been involved in similar situations before, but the complaints were always buried." This revelation added another layer to their case. Sarah Chen, the civil rights specialist, immediately began digging through police records, looking for previous complaints against the two officers. The Chicago Police Union, however, stood firmly behind Thompson and Rivera. Their spokesman, Patrick Murphy, appeared on local news defending the officers. "Our officers made a split-second decision in a potentially dangerous situation," he claimed, though the video clearly showed no threat from Marcus. The case took an interesting turn when Judge Sandra Martinez was assigned to oversee the civil lawsuit. Known for her fair-minded approach and commitment to justice, she refused to be swayed by political pressure from either side. During the first hearing, the courtroom was packed. Officers Thompson and Rivera sat with their union lawyers, looking considerably less confident than they had on the night of the arrest. Marcus presented his case with the same calm professionalism he'd shown during his arrest. "Your Honor," he addressed Judge Martinez, "this case represents more than one incident. It represents a pattern of behavior that must be addressed for the safety and well-being of all citizens." The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the two officers. When their lawyer tried to argue that Marcus had been uncooperative, she cut him off sharply. "I've seen the video, counselor. Let's stick to facts." Outside the courthouse, community activists gathered in support. Signs reading "Justice for Bennett" and "Reform the System" filled the courthouse steps. Marcus's case had become a rallying point for those seeking police reform. Back at his office that evening, Marcus received a call from a national civil rights organization offering support. They saw his case as an opportunity to push for broader changes in police training and accountability across the country. "Your case could set an important precedent," the organization's director explained. "We'd like to file an amicus brief in support of your lawsuit." As Marcus looked through the growing pile of support letters on his desk, he found one that particularly moved him. It was from a young black law student who wrote about how this case had inspired him to pursue civil rights law. "Sometimes it takes one person standing up to create change," the letter read. "Thank you for being that person." That night, as Marcus prepared for the next day's proceedings, he thought about how this incident, meant to humiliate and intimidate him, had instead become a catalyst for potential change. The officers who had arrested him had no idea that their actions would spark such a significant movement for reform. As he packed up his briefcase, his phone buzzed with a news alert. The police department had just announced a review of all their training procedures. It was a small step, but it was progress. And for Marcus Bennett, it was just the beginning. 3 years passed swiftly after the incident, and Marcus Bennett's life had taken an unexpected turn. On a crisp autumn morning, he stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his new black robes. The weight of the judicial garment felt strange yet fitting on his shoulders. "The Honorable Judge Marcus Bennett," he whispered to himself, still getting used to the title. At 35, he had become one of the youngest judges in the state's history. His appointment to the district court had made headlines, not just because of his age, but because of his well-known fight for police reform. His old office at Wilson and Brooks had been packed up the week before. David Wilson had thrown him a farewell party, though everyone knew it wasn't really goodbye. "You'll be seeing plenty of us in your courtroom," Wilson had joked, raising his glass in a toast. Marcus's mother sat in the front row of the courthouse on his first day, beaming with pride as he took his oath. She wore the same dress she'd worn to his law school graduation, and her eyes glistened with tears as she watched her son raise his right hand. "I do solemnly swear," Marcus spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom, "that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich." The irony wasn't lost on anyone that he would be presiding in the same courthouse where his civil rights case had helped bring about significant changes in police procedures. His lawsuit had resulted in mandatory de-escalation training for officers and the establishment of an independent civilian oversight committee. After the ceremony, Judge Peterson, who had supported him through his case and later recommended him for the judgeship, pulled him aside. "Remember, Bennett?" the older judge said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Being on this side of the bench comes with great responsibility. Your experiences make you uniquely qualified to ensure true justice is served." Marcus's first week on the bench proved challenging but rewarding. He handled each case with careful consideration, whether it was a simple traffic violation or a complex civil dispute. His reputation for fairness quickly spread through the legal community. One morning, his clerk brought in a case file that made him pause. It was a police misconduct case, similar to what he had experienced. The plaintiff was a young Hispanic woman who had been roughly treated during a routine traffic stop. "Your Honor," his clerk said hesitantly, "would you like me to request reassignment of this case, given your history?" Marcus studied the file carefully before responding. "No, Sarah, as long as none of the officers involved are from my previous case, I can be impartial. Every case deserves fair consideration, regardless of my personal experiences." His approach to justice was shaped by his own encounter with injustice. In his courtroom, every person was treated with respect, from corporate lawyers to public defenders, from police officers to defendants. He made sure everyone understood their rights and had their voices heard. Marcus also continued his work for reform, but now from a different angle. He volunteered to speak at police academy training sessions, sharing his story and helping new officers understand the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect. One evening, as he was leaving the courthouse, he ran into Maria Rodriguez, who was now a prominent civil rights attorney herself. "How does it feel on the other side of the bench?" she asked with a smile. Marcus thought for a moment. "Different, but good. Every day, I have the opportunity to ensure that justice is truly blind, that it serves everyone equally, regardless of their race, status, or uniform." As he drove home that night, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come from that frightening evening when he'd been wrongfully arrested. The incident that could have broken his spirit had instead strengthened his resolve to improve the system from within. In his study at home, he kept a framed copy of the newspaper article about his case. Next to it hung his judicial appointment certificate. The contrast between the two documents told a powerful story of transformation, not just of his career, but of how justice could prevail in unexpected ways. Little did he know that his biggest test as a judge was just around the corner. Soon, he would face a case that would bring his past and present together in a way nobody could have anticipated. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in Judge Marcus Bennett's courtroom. He sat at his bench, reviewing the day's docket while his clerk organized the case files. The familiar sounds of people filing into the courtroom filled the air. "Next case," Marcus called out, not looking up from his papers. "Johnson versus Chicago Police Department, case number 2025 CV 4872. When he finally raised his eyes, time seemed to freeze. Standing at the defense table were two familiar faces he hadn't seen in 3 years, Officers Thompson and Rivera. They were in their dress uniforms, looking notably older and more worn than when they'd arrested him that night. The officers hadn't noticed him yet, their eyes fixed on their papers. Their attorney, a young woman from the police union, was shuffling through documents. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Bennett," the bailiff announced. As Thompson and Rivera stood, their eyes finally met his. Color drained from their faces as recognition hit them. Officer Thompson's mouth fell slightly open, while Rivera gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Marcus maintained his professional composure, though his heart was racing. "You may be seated," he said calmly, his voice betraying no emotion. The plaintiff's attorney began presenting the case. Another traffic stop gone wrong, another citizen claiming excessive force and racial profiling. As the details unfolded, Marcus felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. The similarities to his own case were striking. "Your Honor," Thompson and Rivera's attorney began, "we move for an immediate recusal given your history with my clients." Marcus looked directly at the two officers. They squirmed uncomfortably under his gaze, probably remembering their last encounter. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. "Counsel," Marcus spoke carefully, "you raise a valid concern. While I believe I could maintain impartiality, even the appearance of bias must be avoided for justice to be properly served." He pressed his intercom button. "Sarah, please contact Judge Rodriguez about taking over this case. I'll be recusing myself due to prior interaction with the defendants." As he spoke these words, Marcus noticed Officer Thompson's shoulders slump slightly with relief. Rivera was staring at the floor, his face flushed with shame. However, Marcus continued, addressing the entire courtroom. "Before I step down from this case, I want to note something for the record." The room fell completely silent. 3 years ago, I stood where Mr. Johnson stands today, facing similar allegations against these same officers. Today, I sit here as a judge, not because of that incident, but despite it. Our justice system works best when we acknowledge our mistakes and learn from them. He paused, making eye contact with each officer. The true measure of justice isn't in revenge or retribution, but in our commitment to fairness and equal treatment under the law. Every person who enters this courtroom deserves that, regardless of their past actions or current position. Thompson and Rivera shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The plaintiff, Mr. Johnson, sat straighter, a look of understanding crossing his face as he realized who Judge Bennett was. "This case will be continued next week before Judge Rodriguez," Marcus announced, rising from his bench. "Court is adjourned." As people began filing out, Marcus noticed Officer Thompson take a step toward his bench, looking like he wanted to say something. But Rivera pulled him back, shaking his head. Later that evening, in his chambers, Marcus sat alone, thinking about the morning's events. His clerk knocked softly before entering. "Judge Bennett, are you all right?" Marcus smiled. "You know, Sarah, I am. 3 years ago, those officers thought they were ending my career. Instead, they became part of a story that helped me reach this position, a position where I can ensure justice is served fairly for everyone." He picked up his gavel, feeling its weight in his hand. Sometimes life comes full circle in the most unexpected ways. As he gathered his things to leave, Marcus noticed a note had been slipped under his door. It was from Officer Thompson. "Your Honor, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that your handling of today's situation taught me more about justice than 20 years on the force. Officer Thompson." Marcus carefully folded the note and placed it in his wallet. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, and new opportunities to ensure justice was served. But today had shown him something important. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in getting even, but in rising above and showing a better way forward. 1 year after the courtroom encounter with Officers Thompson and Rivera, Judge Marcus Bennett sat in his office reviewing the latest police training program statistics. The changes he'd helped implement were showing promising results. Complaints of racial profiling had dropped by 40%, and excessive force incidents were down significantly. The morning sun streamed through his window as he read through a letter from the police academy. They wanted him to be the keynote speaker at their upcoming graduation ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on him, from being wrongfully arrested to teaching new officers about justice. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. His clerk entered with a familiar face, Officer Thompson. The officer looked different now, more humble than that night years ago. He wore civilian clothes instead of his uniform. "Judge Bennett," Thompson said quietly, "I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm here because, well, I'm retiring next month. 25 years on the force." Marcus gestured for him to sit. "What can I do for you, Officer Thompson?" Thompson pulled out a folder from his bag. "I've been working with the Civilian Oversight Committee you helped establish. These past few years, I've been documenting cases of misconduct I've witnessed. Things I used to ignore or excuse." Marcus leaned forward, interested. Thompson continued, "That day in your courtroom last year, seeing you on that bench, it changed something in me, made me realize we need to clean up our own house." The folder contained detailed reports of incidents, dates, and names. It was a goldmine of information that could help push further reforms. Officer Rivera retired 3 months ago, Thompson added. But before he left, he helped me compile some of this information. I think we both needed to make things right somehow. Marcus studied the man before him, not the arrogant officer who had arrested him, but someone who had found his own path to redemption. Later that afternoon, Marcus attended a meeting with the city council. The civilian oversight committee he'd helped create was being expanded, with more power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Judge Bennett, the council chair, addressed him. Your experience has helped create real change in our city. Would you consider heading the new expanded committee? Marcus thought carefully before responding. I believe I can better serve justice from the bench, but I'm happy to continue advising the committee. The key is creating a system that works fairly for everyone, citizens and officers alike. That evening, Marcus visited the police academy to prepare for his upcoming speech. Walking through the halls, he saw fresh-faced recruits studying, training, learning. In one classroom, an instructor was teaching de-escalation techniques, training that hadn't existed when Thompson and Rivera were officers. As he drove home, Marcus passed the spot where he'd been arrested years ago. The street looked the same, but everything else had changed. His wrongful arrest hadn't just been an ending, it had been a beginning. At home, Marcus found an envelope in his mail. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform. Cities across the country wanted to implement similar changes to what had been achieved in Chicago. His phone rang. It was Maria Rodriguez, now a prominent civil rights attorney herself. Marcus, have you seen the latest statistics? The changes you helped implement are being studied by departments nationwide. It's not just me, Maria, he replied. It's everyone who refused to accept that this was just how things had to be. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus thought about how far things had come. The system wasn't perfect. Change never happened overnight, but it was moving in the right direction. His last act before sleeping was to write in his journal, something he'd done every night since becoming a judge. Justice isn't about revenge or getting even. It's about making things right, about creating positive change from negative experiences. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning a case, but in changing the system that made the case necessary in the first place. The next morning, Judge Marcus Bennett would return to his courtroom, ready to ensure justice was served fairly for everyone who entered. His story had become more than just a tale of overcoming injustice. It had become a catalyst for lasting change. And somewhere in the city, 2 retired officers looked back on their careers and remembered the night they'd arrested a lawyer who became a judge. A night that had changed not just his life, but theirs and ultimately their entire city's approach to justice.